CGTN followers around the world, I'm Chen Lei. Welcome to the second floor of the International Media Center here in Da Nang, central Vietnam, where it is the last day of the 2017 APEC. Well, the CEO summit finished yesterday, but the leaders meeting wrapped up today. Yes, all those presidents are either going home or have gone home. And just behind me, as you can see, was where all the press conferences for this year's APEC, well, most of them anyway, took place. And about an hour ago, we just heard the Vietnamese president, Mr. Trang, talk about the achievements made during this year's APEC. And follow me and I will get you a sneak peek at the special wrapping up everything about APEC 2017 and also looking forward, of course, to APEC 2018. So as we walk along here, you can see a lot of journalists still hard at work trying to piece together their articles, trying to get analysis, because also about half an hour ago we had the Canadian Prime Minister. What a rock star he is, because wherever he goes you hear screaming girls. I'm telling you, it's like teenage heartthrob or something. And here we have famous anchor from CCTV Mandarin channel. We won't disrupt her, but yeah, it is never easy to doing live television, so we'll just tiptoe around that. And the press conference was super interesting because there were so many questions about what role Canada played in TPP 11 now that the agreement has supposedly been signed, but there was no actual verbal endorsement by Trudeau on the actual deal. He just said, "I've said all along I support trade, etc.," and would not give more details about what sticking points there were, that what concerns Canada had. And over here we have one of CGTN's most recognized anchors, Tian Wei, who has been a moderator on resources efficiency at yesterday's CEO summit with a number of very distinguished guests, including the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Yes, I will be joining the show as well. And my colleague Chen Pan is just sitting in. So Kat, and he was also last Canadian ambassador to Japan. So CGTN is all over this event, and here is Action Central. You can see a lot of very complex equipment. This is how we get the show to air to you. We've got a computer that controls the prompter. Yes, we do need prompting because otherwise our brains are going to fry. And also this allows our control room to actually tell the anchor what's coming up next. We have got our very, very talented master coordinator, producer Xiao Jian, who is hard at work trying to get all of the technical as well as editorial pieces together for the live show. Mr. Donnell Campbell is reading up on TPP, no doubt, so we'll leave him here. And over there you've got more journalists who are doing their lives wrapping up this event. And here we have Vin, who has been my trusty cameraman over the past few days. Yeah. Do you know that Vin's son is also a video journalist? It's like I had no idea he actually had such a son in the same profession as well. Yes. And the great thing about Vin is that he's extremely professional, and even though I have been very impatient at times, he's never lost his cool with me. So thank you, Vin, for doing such a fantastic job on the shooting.
CGTN great success. I wish CGTN great success. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that. And do you know he has covered a number of wars, including the one in Afghanistan and the tragic war in Vietnam as well. So a very, very accomplished and hard-working cameraman. Okay, let's move on a bit, get out of this chaos that is backstage of live TV producing. And this is our director, Mr. Lee. He doesn't really have time to talk right now, but he's been instrumental in terms of letting everyone do their jobs efficiently. And okay, and now we're back in the corridor. So what we're going to do is just tell you a bit more context about this event and what it has meant, what it will mean to you, to the average person. All right, some of the achievements, we talked about TPP 11, minus the US, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement has now been called the Comprehensive and Progressive TPP. So and the acronyms just keep growing, CPTPP. Is that enough P's for you? Right, it's more P's than peas and mash. So now I'm going to show you some papers because now, while to everyone it might seem that APEC is all about, road closures and us having to battle a lot of logistic hassles to bring all this news to you, and it's just a lot of officials attending, big events, and whether they're both known as very brash, very strong man leaders in this region, but aside from all that, a lot of hard work is actually being put into making this region a better place. For example, one of their biggest topics is about promoting cross-border e-commerce, because did you know that is one of the fastest growing segments of global trade at the moment? Think about all the stuff you buy. I mean, today I was down at the Han Market, which is in central Da Nang, the second largest market in the city, and we saw American grapes, we saw Chinese goods, we saw, goods from all over the place. And I think a lot of the Vietnamese vendors are selling their items online, whether it's through Facebook promotion, whether it's on other platforms like Taobao, like Amazon. This is the stuff that really, changes lives. And I've been super impressed by the amount of urbanization in this city. It's been easy to screen, but we can't because we've got the job to do. Over here in the International Media Center, they've got a big hall where people often do their pieces to camera. Of course, was rolled out for the Vietnamese president this afternoon, and here we've got a number of stalls by some of the sponsors, and they include Vietnamese companies like Vietnam Post and Telecommunications Shop. I actually made some Vietnamese stamps and sent some postcards to my family in Australia, because it's not often that you have APEC Vietnam stamps, and to be honest, people. Here we've got Vietnam Airlines, and I've flown them. Very, very new aircraft, great stuff. And here we have one of our colleagues returning. Let's go and catch her. This is Zhou Yun. She's probably just battled very tough traffic coming back. She went to the press conference held by the Chinese Foreign Ministry today, and she was quite disappointed that she missed seeing Trudeau. So Zhou Yun,
we're
doing
came back.
Yeah, how was it? You're sad that you missed Trudeau, right?
Yeah, but still, it worth it. Yeah.
So what was the message from the Foreign Ministry?
It was mainly, first of all, they consider it as a very fruitful as well as successful meeting, and they give out, I can show you my notebook, because
yes, please.
I'm rushing back to the newsroom too.
Can we read your shorthand?
Yeah, it's really
bilingual.
Sorry for my messy handwriting. So they've got a lot of the deliverables and what they think are the achievements. So, but the basic message is that they think it's very successful and also very fruitful, and also because we know that we just concluded the 19th National Congress of CPC, so the world now is so curious about what is actually going on in China after that, what could be the blueprint.
And what that means for the region, right?
Yeah, and what opportunities, and also another focus is actually on TPP, because we know that the TPP 11, and so there are so many foreign reporters asking questions about that, as you can imagine.
And what was the answer?
Is that China, the first thing they say is that China didn't show much attention or interest to that, because this is Asia Pacific, so it's not only about that, and that the progress, the so-called progress they made, is not even included in the Da Nang declaration. So we should still focus on the major agenda that we're supposed to do under the APEC, and another
which is FTA AP, right?
Exactly. Another thing they say that because now we need to make sure the regional trade, and there should be a basic principle, which is that it should not be exclusive, but inclusive, and that's what happens not only for China but also other economies as well. So
I realize you're busy because you've got a deadline to meet.
Sorry for talking so fast.
Oh, of course we all do. Thanks so much, Zhou Yun. Yep, I'll leave her to it. It's not easy being a journalist, you know. Like yesterday, I had to crawl under a table to do voiceover for a story because otherwise all the audio in this hall is either too echoey or too noisy. So it might seem glamorous at times being a TV journalist, but actually it is a lot of hard work, and meaning everyone has to pitch in together when things do not go right, and that is a lot of the time. But here's to wishing you a great weekend ahead, and we hope you have the opportunity to check out Da Nang, because we certainly had fun being here covering it for you. CGTN followers signing out.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hey, welcome to our special coverage of the 25th Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Conference, which has just concluded in the Vietnamese port city of Da Nang. What has been discussed and achieved there? Stay with us over the next 2 hours to find out. Vietnam calls on APEC members to uphold the group's cooperative mechanism as the host for this year's event hands over the chairmanship to Papua New Guinea.
Join us from our Da Nang studio here in Vietnam to find out what it means to secure sustainable and innovative growth.
We'll also have analysis and comments from our bureaus in Nairobi and Washington, D.C.
As Africa seeks to boost regional trade, we ask what lessons can the continent learn from the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation?
The U.S. president changing his tone a bit at the APEC meeting in Vietnam. We'll take a closer look.
So we'll be joined during this special program by Tian Wei in Da Nang, Elaine Reyes in Washington, D.C., and Muchio Karango in Nairobi. We'll bring you the latest news and analysis on the meetings, so stay with us throughout the hours. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has called on the economies in the Asia-Pacific to work together for a new chapter of win-win cooperation. He made the remarks in a speech at the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting in Da Nang, Vietnam. Xi Jinping said the world economy has gradually recovered in the past 3 years, and he called for innovation, opening up, inclusive development, and shared benefits for a new round of global prosperity. And now we can go live to my colleague Tian Wei, our host in the Da Nang studio. Good to see you there, Tian Wei. So more than 12,000 delegates from the 21 APEC member economies attended this year's meeting. This is indeed a gathering of great minds, isn't it?
Well, Qiu Yuan, that is true. Not only great minds, but also quite a number of consensus being reached. Almost everybody, well, except a few, also still embraces regionalization and globalization. Meanwhile, people look at the economy of the region saying this is the best for years to come. So this is the opportunity to be grasped. And at the same time, everybody is talking about TPP and RCEP, actively negotiating about that. Meanwhile, China gave several numbers of deliverables to stimulate the economy in the region. People are more confident than it used to be. The 25th APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, in fact, wrapped up recently in the city of Da Nang with a ceremony earlier on Saturday. Leaders from 21 member economies attended the event and posed for what's known as the family photo. Vietnamese President Chen Dai-Quang delivered a speech and handed over the chairmanship to next year's host, Papua New Guinea. During the meetings, the leader discussed the strategies for regional integration and the development of the Asia-Pacific region. Asia-Pacific leaders are leaving central Vietnam now with some reason to cheer, despite U.S. President Donald Trump's anti-globalization and protectionist position. The 11 countries still remaining in the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Pact have agreed to uphold the agreement. This follows America's withdrawal from the deal it once championed, and amid reports that negotiations had run into difficulties ahead of the APEC meeting. CGTN's Ryan Melzer has more.
Given that APEC's primary purpose is to promote free trade, this has to be seen as something of a success. In the end, the 11 countries still negotiating the biggest free trade deal the region has ever seen weren't able to ratify the Trans-Pacific Partnership at the APEC leaders meeting. But still they made huge strides towards sealing a pact that many thought was dead and buried after Donald Trump pulled the US out of the TPP in January.
The ministers issued a joint statement affirming that countries have agreed on the core elements of this agreement in the direction of keeping the content of the original TPP agreement, while allowing member countries to temporarily suspend a number of obligations.
So work's still to be done, but better than a rushed deal.
There are lots of areas where if you rush to agree, high standards will be sacrificed. But if you insist on high standards, it can take a long time, or some countries might drop out. So all 11 countries are on board, and this will send out a very strong message to the US and other countries in the region.
The TPP is not the only big trade deal in the works. 12 APEC members, including China, Japan, South Korea, and the ASEAN countries, are working toward concluding another ambitious free trade agreement, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. Speaking Friday, Trump seemed to accuse several fellow APEC members of unfair trade practices and made it clear he opposes multi-nation deals. But APEC's other leaders have made it equally clear they won't let the US obstruct or derail their goal of greater regional integration. Ryan Meltzer, CGTN, Da Nang, Vietnam.
Chinese President Xi Jinping called for inclusive growth and for markets to further open up in his Friday address to the APEC CEO Summit in Da Nang. CGTN's Zhou Yun has the story.
A shared future through open and inclusive development. Chinese President Xi Jinping raised a question about what should Asia-Pacific region do when faced with profound changes in the global economy, and he offered China's approach to this question.
Should we jointly advance regional cooperation, or should we go our separate ways? Here is my answer. We must advance with the trends of the times, live up to our responsibility, and work together to deliver a bright future of development and prosperity for the Asia-Pacific.
Chinese President Xi Jinping also delivered a strong message for embracing the significant contribution of globalization to the world economy. He called globalization an irreversible historical trend and said that openness brings progress while self-seclusion leaves one behind. His emphasis on opening up was welcomed by delegates around the globe.
He laid out a very strong vision for the future, for a new international economic order, for openness, for reform. All in all, it was a very impressive speech.
Xi also expressed China's commitment in creating new drivers of common development through the Belt and Road Initiative, which is seen by delegates as a great way to enhance connectivity on all fronts.
What impressed me the most is that President Xi mentioned that the Belt and Road Initiative starts from China, but aims to help the world be better connected. This means that connections on various fronts will be further enhanced and bring more benefits to people around the world.
Moreover, President Xi's pledge on continuing to pursue China's innovation-driven development offers delegates a new vision for China's development in the new era.
20 years of very successful economic development, we've heard today the new direction of free trade and of innovation. And I think these two very important trends are going to define Chinese policy for the next decades, is to become more engaged with the world, is to be the real champion of globalization, to make the level playing field more even, more equal for all participants, but also to pursue aggressive innovation drive, to embrace digital technologies, big data, artificial intelligence.
The Asia-Pacific region is now at a crucial time where it continues steady growth yet facing multiple challenges. And Chinese President Xi Jinping said that China is willing to work with other economies and leaders in exploring the new economic drivers and, more importantly, in further promoting an open and inclusive growth in the region. So Yun, CGTN, reporting from Da Nang, Vietnam.
During the past few days, I spoke to officials and the leaders of the countries and regions attending the APEC meeting. Here are some of those conversations which shed light on investments by the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the digital economy, and even territorial issues in the region. Take a look. When you have projects everywhere, wouldn't you spread thin? Because AIIB is still only starting.
We have not yet started to work in Africa, except in Egypt, right? We have not worked in South America. But you see, we have already have an understanding and a very, very good relationship with other MDBs. If we in the future work in Africa, we have African Development Bank as our partner. And we have very good support from EBRD, and also Inter-American Development Bank welcomes us to work in South America. And so this co-financing, this kind of close relationship helps a lot because it reduces the cost of both institutions when we work together. And we can depend on the knowledge, networking of those regional development banks.
The private sector is running much more ahead than the government, the civil societies too. For example, the EWTP, if I remember it right, which is the Electronic World Trading Platform that is proposed by Alibaba from China. Mr. Minister, are the governments losing out to the other sectors of the world?
A few days ago, we had Jack Ma in KL launching the first digital free trade zone outside of China. And the governments, of course, are responding to this fast-changing development in ASEAN. We've been talking a lot about e-commerce. In Malaysia, we have a national e-commerce master plan. In APEC, we are very, very keen to have discussions on this matter, including digital economy. Yes, you're right, the private sector is moving very fast. And we wish, Malaysia's view is that the government's got to respond quickly to some of these developments, some of these initiatives introduced by the private sector.
There used to be times when territorial disputes and geopolitical reasons that have become the biggest challenge for China and the Philippines.
Okay, yeah.
How are we going to prevent that from happening again?
Yeah, in the end, it boils down to mutual respect for each other's sovereignty. The president has also made it clear that he values with high regard the commitment also of President Xi Jinping. When the two leaders discuss about the South China Sea, the West Philippine Seas, all these discussions. And the more important thing is that both leaders, even our president, is saying that issues that we cannot agree on for now, we put it aside. And we focus on where we can collaborate and cooperate. And that's the wisdom of our president, and as he discusses these things with the President Xi Jinping.
Despite of the fact there are a lot of issues going on in the region, this is really the place the world is paying attention, the growth engine, possibly, of the world. As a result, so many journalists are here to cover this year's APEC Economic Leaders Meeting, including many of my colleagues who are sitting here with me. For more on that, I'm joined by my colleague, Cheng Lei. Lei, you've been working with us over the past few days. A lot of going on here. What are some of the biggest debates you've been hearing and the people that you've been talking to?
I think the defining moment was, for me, yesterday, sitting in the audience when the US President was making his speech and then contrasting it to the reaction in the audience to the Chinese President's speech. Because from that, you get a really good idea of how people in the region really feel about globalization and free trade. I mean, just today, I should mention that I had this very top made in one of Vietnam's, in one of Da Nang's markets. And just walking around, this is a very, very local market, I saw grapes. I saw fruit, oranges, from the US. So I think Donald Trump should go to this market. And I saw produce from mainland China. I saw a lot of goods from other countries. So, and on the streets, I mean, you've noticed a lot of South Korean, a lot of Japanese cars, people using Apple phones, and Airbnb, for example. A lot of their listings in Da Nang, and in fact their listings over in this city, are tripling. So you cannot say that this city has taken advantage, or this country has taken advantage of the US or any other country. I think that the prosperity and the urbanization that we see here is really because of that. And while it sounds like there's a lot of macro messages, but when you break it down, I mean, I was looking at the details of some of these annex documents. This is really making change happen, whether it's going to be more cross-border e-commerce, I mean, growing at an astonishing speed right now, or food security because of urbanization. Who's going to grow our food in the future? These are very real topics.
Despite of the fact many of the discussions going on here tend to be technical, because it is technical. We will talk about trade deals. When we talk negotiations, about every detail. But the overall picture is about the growth engine of the world. And the growth is coming up. The growth rate itself, unlike the previous years. So this is the time when people are really looking at their future. You talk to some of those from the business community who are looking at the future. What are they saying to us?
Well, two big investment themes I heard from a lot of the CEOs and business leaders I spoke to. One is technology, whether it's Creditese of China investing a whole lot in global fintech, whether it's, as I mentioned, Airbnb putting a lot more money on their platforms so that tourists around the world can benefit. And then the other theme, of course, is about this region, about Southeast Asia. We heard about the tiger cubs, including Vietnam. The CEO survey from PwC was saying that about 70% of CEOs are going to invest in 5 countries. They include Vietnam, Thailand, China, of course, and the US. So, when I talk to business people, it's not like they're pessimistic at all about free trade, about globalization, or this region.
So shall we hear some of their voices?
Yes, let's do.
Let's listen in.
The speed of advancement in technology in areas like robotics, artificial intelligence, automation has been increasing, quite a bit. So we need to keep up with that, and that's why a third of that budget is dedicated to new initiatives. And some we do by ourselves, some we do with partners. So we try to look for everywhere where we can obtain a benefit.
We think that by 2020, China can be the leading market for Airbnb. Immediately, there's 3 commitments that we're making. One is to have industry-leading customer service. We are hiring 150 people at the start of the year to offer customer service from within China for all Chinese travelers, whether they're in China or traveling abroad. The second thing is to have the highest quality of homes domestically in China. And the third is to continue to be the best way for Chinese travelers to discover and explore the world.
Certainly today, the average Chinese is happier with the Chinese model than the average American is with the American model. And given that no one voted for the Chinese model, that's an extraordinary thing to say. And I think that Americans aren't paying attention. I mean, in my lifetime, there have been 2 speeches that people really needed to pay attention to globally. The first was when Gorbachev ended the Soviet Union. Right. And the second was when Xi Jinping spoke at the 19th Party Congress 2 weeks ago. Well, the first one, we understood the historical nature of that. This last one, 2 weeks ago, made exactly 2 hours of news in the United States, then everybody forgot about it. I think that's unacceptable. This time cover is primarily for an American audience, not for a Chinese audience, but I mean, everybody needs to be discussing the fact that the liberal democratic model right now does not feel fit for purpose for the 21st century.
I think if you see the real numbers, and every expert would agree, that most of the jobs have been created in the last decades by economic and global growth, which was based to some extent certainly on global trade. Second, the job losses, even the recent past, are more linked to technologies or new technologies rather than on global trade. However, we have to accept that there is a concern in people's mind, and we have to address it. Otherwise, we won't succeed with any free trade agreement in the near future.
A lot of business leaders certainly are sharing their thoughts with us, but at the same time, they're doing interactions with different kinds of regional organizations and certainly governments. Among them, I have in my studio Donnell Campbell, who is the international co-chair of the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council. Mr. Donnell, welcome to our program.
Great pleasure to be here with you.
You are originally coming from Canada.
I'm originally coming from Canada. I'm still coming from Canada.
The Canadian Prime Minister is blurring a little bit in his thoughts about whether to join or not with the TPP. What's your thought?
I don't think that he is blurring his thoughts on whether to join or not join. I think he's made it fairly clear that Canada would like to join, but there are things that I understand that he wants in that agreement before agreeing to sign on.
That's the thing, isn't it? When you have multilateral trade mechanism, you really need to meet everybody's basic line.
Yes, you have to meet everybody's basic line. At the same time, there has to be a lot of give and take on the part of everybody. Otherwise, you will never get to
not only
a bottom
TPP,
line.
but also RCEP and some of the other regional organizations and mechanisms also running into the same thing.
Exactly. Trade negotiations never run smoothly, and if successful, they come together at the end through a process both of negotiation, but a process of compromise.
But many people are asking, you know, at the end of the day, Mr. Campbell, when you come out of those meetings, are you more confident as a result, or are you more stressed as a result? Because there's so much thing that has not been handled. There's still so much disagreement among one another.
Well, I guess my biggest worry is not that there's lack of agreement, but it's the issue of momentum. And there is a lot of momentum for the TPP right now, the TPP 11, or the 12 minus 1 a TPP, so there's momentum. And I worry that as countries, including Canada, start introducing either conditions or wishes or desires, and the process gets spread out, as you lose that momentum, it gets more and more difficult to come to a conclusion.
Yes, timeline is extremely important for negotiations like this. Having said that, though, there's another line that is going on here, which is the discussions and the ideas some of the state leaders have about what kind of future we want. For example, you heard yourself the speech given by U.S. President Donald Trump and also the Chinese President Xi Jinping. We don't want to compare apple to pear, but what are some of the takes from your perspective?
Well, from my perspective, the speech by President Trump was unfortunate. The view that he holds is not one that I hold. Ever since the Havana Agreement that created the GATT and then the World Trade Organization in 1947, the international trading system has been developed significantly through American leadership on a multilateral, rules-based approach. Mr. Trump is advocating sovereignty, independence, which is important for all of us, but at the same time, his approach is not one that is fostering either a regional or a multilateral approach with the give and take that is needed. And a rules-based system is tremendously important, particularly for smaller countries.
More and more because of globalization. Everybody has to have the same set of rules.
Yes, we need the same set of rules because of globalization. And trade is not everything. Trade is a vehicle for economic growth and our well-being. But we do need rules.
That, of course, is only WTO. But what about NAFTA? I mean, that's something that your country is facing day by day.
Yes. Well, the NAFTA negotiations, and I supervised the original NAFTA negotiations, so I feel I've got a particular interest in this subject. Again, the NAFTA did need renovation because it was 20 years old. The digital economy, e-commerce did not exist when the NAFTA was created, so there was a lot that needed to be done on the NAFTA. But again, the approach that the American administration has taken so far is a very difficult one to deal with, because basically it means tearing down the agreement and introducing this both a bilateral approach but an America First approach.
So when you look at North America and when you look at Asia Pacific region as a whole, because you're here for the APEC Economic Leaders Week, What are some of the thoughts you have in your mind? I mean, where is going to be if you look at the real future for Canada and for some of the other countries as well?
Well, if I look at it for Canada, obviously about 75% of Canadian exports of goods and services are to the United States. So
Right.
3/4 of our total trade is there. So the United States, whatever happens, will always be the most important and the primary market for Canada. At the same time, a country like Canada needs to diversify its trading relationships, and obviously it has concluded an agreement with the European Union and Asia, the Asia-Pacific region, which is the region that has been and will be the engine of growth, is going to be a very important area for Canada.
We already wrapped up the APEC CEO Summit and, of course, the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting. They seem to come out with a lot of agreements on words. What do you think, Mr. Campbell, are the most important key words to you and the takeaway?
Well, I think that when you look at the statements that have been produced by the foreign and trade ministers and the statements that have been produced by the leaders, one is fairly optimistic. Having said that, that is what is on paper. The reality will be what happens when we move forward in negotiations. I think on the part of most of us, there is a view that we need a more inclusive economic growth, because obviously the forces of populism and anti-free trade, anti-globalization have come from people who feel that they have been left out. So that is one of the important messages that has come from this. At the same time, we need to, some of the vehicles for that, small and medium-sized enterprises, which is another feature of the agreement.
And
so
also innovation as well.
And innovation, you know, it's people talk about the fourth industrial revolution and the changes that we're going to need. Obviously in 2020, that we are supposed to have achieved the Bogor goals of free and open trade. We will not be there. We have made significant progress, but we're still far from there. But we're going to have to look at the future, post-2020, and a vision group has been established. And the Pacific Economic Cooperation Council has been very much involved in that sort of blue sky, looking at what the future will be.
Talking about blue sky, we've been having a little blue sky, a little sunshine here in Da Nang. It's raining again, but I guess
that may be reflective of the meetings.
Donnell Campbell, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a great pleasure.
All the best.
All right.
And that is all from now here in Da Nang. Back to you, Qiuyuan, in Beijing.
Thank you so much, Tianwei. Now you're watching a 2-hour special on the 25th Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, which has just concluded in the Vietnamese port city of Da Nang. But what exactly is this forum all about? Let's now take a closer look.
The Asian-Pacific Economic Cooperation is an economic forum that aims to advance regional economic integration and prosperity. It was established in Canberra, Australia in 1989 with 12 members. And today, its members have increased to 21. In 2015, the APEC members represented around 2.8 billion people. That's about 40% of the world's population. And it accounted for nearly 60% of the world's GDP and 50% of world trade. In 1994, APEC leaders in Bogor, Indonesia committed to achieving free and open trade and investment in the Asia-Pacific by no later than 2020. So how does APEC try to achieve this goal? Mainly through 3 areas, also known as APEC's 3 pillars. First, trade and investment liberalization, which lets members open up markets and integrate economies. Second, business facilitation, which aims to improve the ease of doing business and create new economic opportunities. Third, economic and technical cooperation. This focuses on building the technical capacity of the members, with priorities such as cross-border education, skills training, and fighting corruption. Every year, one of the 21 APEC members hosts APEC meetings and serves as the APEC chair. Over the years, certain meetings have become regular features, including the leaders' meeting and the ministerial meeting. During these different meetings, ministers, delegates, and experts gather together, trying to find consensus, doing business, and sharing their expertise. China joined the organization in 1991 and has twice hosted APEC meetings. The first was in 2001 in Shanghai, and the second in 2014 in Beijing. APEC has become a dynamic engine for economic growth in the region. As a result of its work, real GDP increased from $19 trillion in 1989 to $42 trillion in 2015. Meanwhile, residents of the Asia-Pacific saw their per capita income grow by 74%, ending the poverty for millions and widening the middle class in just over 2 decades. Wang Yuan, CGTN.
All right, now let's get more perspectives. Joining me in the studio are Mr. Li Yong, a current affair commentator, and Mr. Andy Mock, managing director at Red Pagoda Resources. Welcome to you both. So let me start with Mr. Li first. If you look at the theme of this year's meeting, it's all about creating new dynamism, fostering a shared future. But talk to us about the bigger picture here. Why do you think these are being put forward, and why now?
Yeah, I think the reason that they choose this theme is because of the sluggish recovery of the economy, regional and global, and we need, in this region, APEC. I think basically they put the regional economic recovery and growth as the most important target. Through this kind of a meeting, and there are 4 or 5 critical factors actually that will need to have consensus among the APEC members. For example, boosting trade and investment, and we are facing some sort of problems actually with that, particularly in the context of the rising anti-globalization or deglobalization. And secondly is the economic integration, and that has been a topic within APEC for quite a bit of time, and then structural reform. And each of the countries, they have their structural problems, and overall we need to implement some sort of structural reform. And we also need to identify, for example, sources of growth, which is actually should be an effort to encourage innovation. And that there are also a need for those countries to be closely connected physically, institutionally, and people to people. So we need to have new dynamism, as well as we need to have a shared future, because if we create those new drivers of growth, and we need to move them forward together and share the growth. Otherwise, it's just not going to be a kind of a consensus. It's not going to be promoting the growth of all the member countries involved.
Andy, let me bring you in this. What factors, when you talked about finding new growth sources, what factors could really help create new dynamism?
Well, I think the single most important factor to create regional dynamism is a stable, strong, and growing China. And in that regard, one of the most important outcomes of the 19th Party Congress was the ratification of Xi Jinping thought. And we can look at this as a computer software, operating software upgrade. And specifically, the strengthening and the broadening of the role of the CPC, the Communist Party of China, in more spheres of activity in China allows the government to offer a more integrated and coordinated response both to opportunities and threats. So I think that is the most important factor, I think, contributing to this new dynamism that all these countries are looking for.
Yeah. Well, the Chinese president also laid out his vision for growth. Some of the key concepts include innovation-driven digital economy, sharing economy, artificial intelligence. How good do you think those concepts are?
Well, I think they are based on very real achievements over the last few years. So within this broader context of Made in China 2025, where China is seeking global leadership in key technologies, artificial intelligence you mentioned, new materials, that we look at some of the key foundational technologies. So supercomputers, China's been leading with the fastest supercomputers for the last 4 or 5 years. We look at things as we move up the technology stack. That's a foundational technology. China's making large advances in big data. So China clearly has the hardware. It has the largest data sets. It's increasingly assuming a leadership role in the software and the algorithms for artificial intelligence. And then lastly, when we look at business models, China's leading in areas of things like social messaging, integrated applications like WeChat, also the sharing economy as well with Mobike and OFO. So I think these are very real achievements on which this goal is based on.
All right, stay with me for a little longer. Now, I want to also look at this. On Friday, Chinese President Xi Jinping gave a keynote speech on the global economy in transition and calling for accelerated development in the Asia-Pacific. And he called for the APEC economies to work together for common prosperities in the region. Take a listen.
继续加强互联互通，实现联通发展。
We should continue to enhance connectivity and achieve interconnected development. This is the best way to achieve mutual benefit. We, the Asia-Pacific economies, are closely connected and our interests are interlocked. Interconnected development will open up new horizons for our own development and create a driving force for us all to achieve common development as partners.
The APEC Connectivity Blueprint was formulated in 2014. The APEC members set the target to enhance physical, institutional, and people-to-people connectivity by 2025. So it means that APEC member economies agreed to invest in enhancing connectivity in the Asia-Pacific in all dimensions. They will focus on raising more funds for infrastructure development and breaking the financing bottleneck, for example, through public-private partnership. Meantime, there are new initiatives to facilitate cross-border business travels, tourism, and educational exchanges so that ordinary people will benefit from connectivity development. The Belt and Road Initiative from China is also a good example of taking regional connectivity as the best focus. President Xi Jinping also mentioned that this time, saying he is confident that initiatives will create a broader and more dynamic platform for Asia-Pacific cooperation. And to understand how enhancing regional connectivity can boost economic development, here's my colleague Jiang Xiaoyi with more.
Well, Children, regional trade between developing and developed countries is becoming ever more important to the global value chain, especially within the Asia-Pacific region. The 21 APEC member economies include both developed and developing economies, seeking to increase connectivity to boost economic growth. When APEC was founded in 1989, its combined GDP was around $19 trillion US. And in 2015, that had risen to $42 trillion, nearly 60% of the world's total GDP and around 50% of world trade. The World Bank says in 2009, the vast majority of the value add on APEC exports originated in the region, while intra-APEC merchandise trade accounted for about 2/3 of its total. In 2009, data from APEC's Policy Support Unit show Forum just trailing behind the G8 and G20 groups in terms of the average connectedness of its value-added trade. And just 2 years ago, APEC created a 10-year blueprint to promote connectivity, including physical, institutional, and people-to-people connectivity. The physical connectivity aims to promote infrastructure investment through public-private partnerships and an increase in broadband internet access. Institutional connectivity includes modernizing customs and the supply chain, while people-to-people connectivity includes the introduction of the APEC Business Travel Card and APEC Scholarship Initiative. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Xiaoyi. Now let me bring back my panel, Mr. Andy Mok and also Mr. Li Yong. So speaking of connectivity, China's Belt and Road Initiative has really focusing on infrastructure development and building the links between Asia, Africa, and Europe. How is this project being viewed in Asia-Pacific economies, though?
First, I think most of the APEC member countries are kind of located en route the Belt and Road. They are actually part of the program already, and connectivity actually has been recognized, as mentioned earlier, as part of the connectivity blueprint. So this actually is considered, early. I think we talked about the 3 pillars, right? The pillars. One of the pillars is economic and technical cooperation. In the past, before the Belt and Road Initiative was launched, the cooperation in that area, economic, technological cooperation, used to be weak. But with this initiative, it's going to be very strong, and all the countries will be connected. And with this connectivity, they will be able to develop their respective economies and contribute to the economic growth of the whole region. I think this is very important. And as a matter of fact, if you look at some of the projects, some of them, for example, the railway in Indonesia, and some other projects in other member countries have already been started. So in the future, I think all the members is going to be involved in building the economy as connected as possible, so that the countries can be developed in a kind of a connected way.
Yeah, this is obviously an ambitious project, but what about other multilateral trade pact? TPP is practically stalled after U.S. pulled out, but the remaining members are still trying to give it a try to revive the pact. And RCEP is also under negotiation, and FTAP is also there on the table. What do you think of the progress that could be made on these pacts?
Well, I think short term there's a lot of difficulties because any multilateral agreement requires consent by all of the parties, and you have many different countries at different levels of development with different priorities. Of course, that's very difficult, but I think consensus is inevitable. So during the Obama administration, Obama said we cannot let China write the rules of global trade, but I think it's going to be inevitable because China, because of its ability to offer markets, capital, and technology, that consensus will be reached just because China has so much to offer, whether it's through the Belt and Road Initiative, through its own policies and initiatives such as the rejuvenation of the Chinese nation, the realization of the Chinese dream, that either the magnetic pull of all of these resources and opportunities, I think, are going to result in many, if not most countries, reaching an agreement that will be largely Chinese-led. Some say that some seek greatness, some have greatness thrust upon them, and I think in China's case it's a little bit of both.
Thank you. Well put. Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed further opening up and inclusive growth in his keynote speech at the APEC CEO Summit on Friday. Adopting an open door policy has made China a major player in international trade. The country's decades of growth have increased trade links with other global economies and affected trading partners in the Pacific Rim. Now, CGTN's Han Bin went to Shenzhen, the country's first special economic zone, to discover the secret to the success. The city was previously known as the factory of the world and is now called the incubator for innovation.
Welcome to Shenzhen.
Shenzhen offers everything that anyone could find in the city.
I think there's a lot of potential for the city.
Shenzhen is quite fascinating in this way that it has all of these realities that seems to be contradictory to each other, but in fact they work quite well together. This working relationship is not planned.
You could tell from the change every day.
I love every moment.
What is behind Shenzhen's miracle? Do you think that its experience can be duplicated?
Well, I think a lot has been said about the miracle of Shenzhen from an economic sense and political sense. Something I like to emphasize that I think people don't really discuss enough is really the human psychology. Is that Shenzhen in the 1980s in China offered a complete liberation of mind, and people was told do whatever to make money, do whatever to create a life for yourselves. So that was a tremendous change from everywhere else in China.
我希望对自己现状不满、希望改变的人来到深圳，通过改变阻碍创新的一些制度要素，极大地促进了创新的发展。这是深圳30年的创新提供的一个最核心的经验。所以深圳的创新实际上是从需求端开始的，快速的制造能力，华强北的电子配套市场，完善的这个供应链。所以我们看到最近几年，这个连硅谷都要在华强北创办孵化器，它背后的潜在的逻辑就是全球的创新的这个棋局中需要中国的角色，就是把自己的 进化的非常快的这个需求端，还有对制造业的这个供应链的配套的这个优势，跟发达国家的这些源头的实验室技术能够结合起来，创造一个新的一个产业平台。这样一个故事正在发生。
So when I came to this city in 2010, I found this is really a unique place. The spirit here, it's great for startup. If you can have some great idea, you can quickly turn an idea to product. We started the company with a simple mission, to improve the way people interact with and perceive the world, using the physical information to combine this polyvalent and large-screen visual experience into a single device.
So over the past 3-4 decades, Shenzhen went from a rural border town of 300,000 people to a mega metropolis of 20 million people. So this rate of population growth is unprecedented in history. No other city, not only in China, no other city in the world has seen such rapid growth, both in human population and also in economy.
And the thing that attracted me here, the quality of living.
Want to learn how to fly the kite?
People know that Shenzhen is life. Shenzhen is so modern that their music styles and tastes are evolving. I love Shenzhen. I would like to bring my own style to jazz and blues in my own interpretation. This is a great place. There are many great opportunities for you there, for music, for business, for pleasure.
There definitely will be a lot of exciting things happening in the next 5 to 10 years. As long as we keep the openness, the creativity, there will be definitely a bright future.
深圳的价值，以及后边站着中国大市场未来的价值。中国在下一步创新的全球创新的格局中，会以新的角色出现，会把自己应用端制造业的配套的能力参与到全球创新的格局中，扮演一个创造性的一个角色，而不是简单的跟随模仿。
The challenge is how can Shenzhen, now having achieved a success, to still have the courage to continue to reinvent, to break rules, and to not be afraid to challenge existing standards. Shenzhen was really put in a position to reinvent new ways, and I think the way for Shenzhen to go forward, I hope, is continue this.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Shenzhen.
I'm Bing reporting there. Many thanks. Now, seeking regional connectivity is one of APEC's main initiatives. The decades of fast economic development in the Asia-Pacific has often been attributed to the increase in free and open trade and investment among the regional economies. While the region accounts for only about 40% of the world's population, it contributes 60% of global GDP and 50% of world trade. The APEC experience and spirit could be an inspiring example for Africa. And for more on this, we can go live to my colleague Uchi Okoronko in Nairobi.
Thank you. Now, as we know, the APEC 2017 forum does come to an end today. And for the past week, the focus has been on this grouping of 21 countries that contribute, of course, nearly 60% to world GDP. Now, the world's biggest economies, the US and China, are part of this group, and they make developments there, making developments there quite interesting to many countries right here on the African continent. Now, to some in Africa, APEC does represent a larger version of the BRICS group of emerging economies, which is what most countries here identify with. Now, CGTN Sumitra Naidu looks at the similarities between the two trading blocs and certainly what Africa can borrow as it seeks to consolidate trading blocs.
APEC has been around since 1989 and has proved to be an extremely successful trading initiative. But since BRICS was formed in 2006, the grouping has managed to grab a significant share of global trade.
There was certainly a surge in trade and investment relations between these countries, and we did see a lot more activity, a lot more cooperation. I think cooperation was probably the biggest achievement and takeaway from the BRICS countries and cooperation between the BRIC countries in other parts of the world.
But BRICS too is facing a few headwinds. The BRICS nations span 4 continents, while the APEC countries are all connected by the Pacific Ocean, giving it a geographic advantage, making trade easier.
The countries are all within reach of each other, and its aim is to stimulate regional trade. You're looking at Brazil in South America, Russia in Europe, and India and China in Asia. That's very geographically spread, and with South Africa too. It doesn't look, it's not a cohesive unit, and I think that is a big difference between them. So I think what we may see now is China perhaps putting more emphasis on their relationships with APEC.
The new development bank has been hailed as the biggest achievement of the BRICS grouping, but some believe the commodity slump, slowing growth and political upheavals may have taken the shine of the emerging markets cluster.
Take the development bank as it is. They are still looking for capital. We haven't seen any announcements of major infrastructure development projects that they have been involved in. There haven't been a lot of them anyway. And I think they are struggling to accumulate capital to be able to build up a base from which they can then make advances on a commercial basis.
Between 1989 and 2015, APEC became one of the most important regional forums in the Asia-Pacific. It reduced trade barriers, ironed out regulation, facilitated regional integration, and boosted economic growth, which lifted millions out of poverty. Lessons that could be applied to some of the BRICS nations who are currently trapped by low economic growth and high levels of poverty. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, Africa as a continent has seen steady growth in trade with some APEC nations. For instance, China's trade with African countries in the first quarter climbed by nearly a fifth from a year earlier, while, of course, its direct investment in the continent soared about 64%. Let's take a look at the trade relationship between Africa and the rest of the world.
Economic relations between China and Africa began centuries ago and continue through to present day. The majority of Africa's exports to China are comprised of mineral fuels, lubricants, and related materials. China exports a range of machinery, transportation, communications equipment, as well as manufactured goods to African countries. With regards to exports, in the east of Africa, exports of food and drink are very important, including coffee, grains, and livestock. Textiles and clothing is also an important industry. In Morocco, Tunisia, and Lesotho, clothing, shoes, and textiles are the biggest exports. Equally, cotton is vital to the economies of Mali, Togo, and Benin. In the south and central regions, precious metals and minerals are the biggest exports. This includes gold in Tanzania and South Africa, diamonds in Namibia and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and platinum in Zimbabwe. Africa struggles with food items and basic facilities. African imports feature medical supplies as well as food items.
Now, the 2017 APEC CEO Summit in Vietnam has brought together about 21 member states. Of course, they're discussing further strengthening of regional economic cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region. But in Africa, similar regional economic blocs do exist. One such is ECOWAS, which comprises about 15 member countries. But as the Asia-Pacific region continues to forge ahead with more robust regional trade, how is West Africa's ECOWAS faring? Well, CGTN's Kelechi Emekelam put this question to the ECOWAS economic advisor, Professor Ken Ife. Take a look.
Now, the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit is holding this month in Vietnam, mostly to facilitate trade in that region. For the West African region, ECOWAS is the equivalent of such a regional trading bloc. Could you share experiences of how much ECOWAS has facilitated integrated regional trade in here?
Well, at ECOWAS level, we have done quite a bit in terms of developing the institutional framework and the policy framework for trade facilitation and economic integration. For example, the treaty setting up ECOWAS has free movement of goods, services, right of establishment, capital, so it's there. Now, in theory, you have to qualify by, there's a rule of origin. It has to be no less than 30% value addition. But even when you meet those, there are issues on the corridors, transporting things and, making sure that this thing actually does work.
Let's look at agriculture, for instance. The region is well covered with fertile soil, yet it imports huge volumes of food like maize and rice from elsewhere. Now, do you feel something needs to change? And what are we not getting right as a region?
There's absolutely no reason why we should not be self-sufficient in food production, because we are heavily endowed with all the agroecological zones. We have swampy forests, swamp forests, we have tropical, we have savanna, Guinea savanna, different savannas, Sahel savanna, we have all of those. But then we still have severe challenges on technology, on transport, on cold chain infrastructure. So what then happens, like if you take the case of Nigeria, 30 to 70% of food produced in Nigeria never make it into the food chain.
A report by the World Bank says despite commitments by member states and ECOWAS, most of the policies of members are more nationalistic. And that's why economic integration or regional trade has not taken off quite well yet. Well, would you think that's a fair assessment?
We don't have as much coordination. And that's why we are having issues about the implementation of regional protocols in these various aspects, in transport, in clearance of goods, and in movement of goods. So there are gaps, significant gaps. But also, there are steps forward, actually. If you look at the common external tariff, it's a big leap forward, that we are no longer having to deal with tariff regimes in 15 different countries. We now have a single tariff regime, band 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's applying broadly. And where there are issues, member states can use levy instrument to compensate. But, and just as they said, there are other areas where we are having issues. For example, EPA agreement was signed by every other member of ECOWAS except Nigeria and Gambia. I think Gambia may well be wanting to sign soon, but Nigeria has issues, very serious issues that is preventing Nigeria from signing that agreement.
Now, in regional economic blocs like ECOWAS, proper integration usually fails over level of development and scale of economies among member countries. Now, small states fear being swallowed up by the bigger ones, underlooking benefits of integrating with smaller ones. Now, do you experience such obstacles in ECOWAS?
The small states are actually depending more on import of goods from European unions, and they don't have the manufacturing strength that Nigeria has. So they are not worried about the issue of the industries, fearing that they are going to be made redundant. So protection of infantry industrial protection wasn't really a key agenda for the small West African countries. But it's a big one for Nigeria, because not only that we have 189 million people, we have about 65% of the whole of ECOWAS, and we have 80% of the manufacturing capacity. So we would worry about any agreement that is suitable for all the smaller West African countries, but could deal a serious blow to our industrialization program. So that is the opposite of what you were asking me. Smaller countries may think you may dominate. No, but this is where, it could hurt the big boy.
Well, joining us to discuss key issues surrounding this summit and certainly the continent is Rufus Mwanyasi. He is the managing director at investment firm Donnell Capital. You're very welcome to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Now, when we look at some of the hot issues at this year's APEC summit, globalization, certainly the future of trade agreements going forward, U.S. credibility, China's changing role as a leader. So, give me your take on what are the discussions at this summit that we should be paying attention to as a continent.
I think there's a whole lot that the African continent or the countries there can learn a lot from this summit. I think there are points of reflection. Key point, we're talking about the Asian summit, and this is a combination of about 21 countries celebrating 25 years of closer relationship. They're doing business over 60%. 50% of global trade. I think a point for consideration for most African countries is how do they get there. I think there's a way we can learn the benefits of close cooperation, and you should, as you mentioned earlier, we have no less than 4 economic blocks. I mean, so the question could be, is it a point where we need to have more of a single block to help, rationalize tariffs and trade agreements, and to have one front engaging with the world? I mean, and I say that because I mean, we've had these economic blocks for for almost 30 years plus, right. But we've seen little progress in terms of economic growth and such. So I think that's just one important point for reflection. There's also the point of looking at what kind of investments are we should we expect to tap into this whole summit, and I think the talk about investments into innovation, and and I had coming out of the summit, innovation into aerospace and all these things. What can we learn? What can we tap in terms of technical assistance getting from these countries? So I think it's an interesting time for African players to start paying attention.
And one thing that I think was interesting that came out of this summit was the fact that we're seeing a definite pushback against protectionism globally, which is obviously good for Africa as a continent. Now, looking at the discussions at this meeting, do you think that there was definitely a signal that protectionism will not be as big of a threat to Africa going forward?
I think protectionism is a big threat, not just to Africa, but for everyone. And I think more so for Africa, because we're still trying to get there, all right? And you look at the Asian story, I mean, over the last 30 years, they've literally bust through the the weight because of close cooperation and opening up their borders for intertrade. Okay, and that's how they've managed to live up themselves economically. And I think for us, if we are to say protectionism, then it's going to be a very bad deal for Africans, especially considering that Africa as a continent does a lot of business with global partners as opposed to within itself. So I think it's a bigger threat if indeed it's not we don't treat it if it indeed it becomes a reality. Yeah.
Now, what other lessons do you think that Africa can learn from this meeting?
One other lesson is first of all, let's talk about the main player there, which is China. I mean, going back 30 years, we were almost the same place for most African countries, economically speaking. Right. But they've managed to lift themselves up, and the number is about half of the population is out of poverty. And I think for us is what can we learn from, how do we recalibrate our economic models? What can we borrow from the example, and so that we can push our economies forward as well?
Well, many thanks for joining us in the studio. Thank you so much for your insights. Of course, that's Rufus Mwanyasi. He's a managing director with Donnell Capital. Now, the East Africa community, which is one of those 5 blocks, economic blocks here in Africa, it's a 5-nation trading bloc. It has had its share of hiccups in one of Africa's quests to enhance regional trade. With a customs union in place and a free immigration policy taking shape now, the regional bloc has spurred a trade within its members. Now, Alexandria Majala looks at the bloc's progress moving forward.
The East African community traces its history back to 1917. At the time, only Kenya and Uganda were in partnership. Today, the intergovernmental organization is made up of 6 countries: Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda.
If you look at the different partner states, they have what to offer, and that is in East Africa. But the more we bring the resources together, the more we integrate, the more we work together, I think each partner state of the East African community benefits more than if we worked all on our own.
Despite a 22-year hiatus between 1977 and 1999, the region came together once more to build a future based on common interests and goals. The partner countries established a customs union between 2004 and 2005 and even added new members, Burundi and Rwanda, in 2007, with South Sudan later joining in 2016. The EAC will see a reduction in tariffs for industrial goods and an ease in investment procedures.
We are encouraging private sector investment in the energy sector. As a region, we are working together to see how we can improve connectivity between Kenya, Uganda and Rwanda, Tanzania, including South Sudan, partnering with Ethiopia to see how we can maximize our available energy and potential future energy sources and make it available, across the region at an affordable price.
The East Africa Community presidents signed the Common Market Protocol, a treaty that will give the countries freedom of movement of goods, labor, services and capital, significantly boosting trade and investment. However, the second East African Community Common Market Scorecard 2016 shows that Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi still run their trade as separate and distinct markets. For instance, on the Economic Partnership Agreement with the European Union, Kenya and Rwanda signing and Tanzania choosing to back out of the deal.
Please, don't panic. We have met, we have spent almost 6 hours, more than that, discussing. We know what we are talking about. Give us another 3 months, you will see our position.
Despite the sometimes shaky relations, the EAC has improved movement across the borders with the introduction of the East African passports. The body has also been instrumental in maintaining peace in the region, stepping in as mediators in times of conflict. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Well, there you have it. Africa has had a lot to learn in terms of regional cooperation and certainly the benefits of trade from this APEC summit. Well, that's all for now. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you so much, Uchi. Now let's take a short break on this special coverage on the 2017 APEC Leaders Meeting in Vietnam. Stay with us.
This is CGTN.
You're watching CGTN. I'm Jeff Moody, live in Beijing.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Washington, D.C.
You're watching CGTN.
Coming to you from Nairobi.
I'm members of business
Mark, what can you tell us about events happening there?
Politics.
This is a pretty picture. I think of the event.
Second time back over to Beijing.
To go after them.
It's all about the dance.
This is CGTN. CGTN. See the difference.
People on the go. Businesses grow. Leaders get together.
共享经济全球化的好处。
Looking for a common destiny. Powering strong economies. The APEC 2017 in Vietnam. Creating new dynamism. Fostering a shared future. Catch the live coverage from Da Nang, Vietnam on CGTN.
And welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump landed in Vietnam on Friday for the APEC meetings. It is the fourth leg of his 12-day Asia trip. What message has he conveyed so far? For more on this, we can head over now to my colleague Elaine Reyes in Washington, D.C.
To you, and the United States has been part of APEC from the very beginning. It joined in November of 1989. One of the most crucial meetings in the early years came in 1994. At the time, the U.S. president was Bill Clinton, and the APEC meeting was in Bogor, Indonesia. APEC leaders came to an agreement known as the Bogor Goals for, quote, free and open trade and investment in the Asia-Pacific by 2010 for developed economies and 2020 for developing economies. Now, the goal of free trade, not exactly the goal of the current U.S. President Donald Trump. Here's how he put it in his address to leaders Friday in Vietnam.
I will make bilateral trade agreements with any Indo-Pacific nation that wants to be our partner and that will abide by the principles of fair and reciprocal trade. What we will no longer do is enter into large agreements that tie our hands, surrender our sovereignty, and make meaningful enforcement practically impossible.
Of course, Trump's stop before Vietnam was China. He was in Beijing for a state visit hosted by Chinese President Xi Jinping. The countries announced a series of big agreements between companies, some new, some already planned. Here are some of the most notable from the U.S. perspective. Boeing will sell 300 passenger planes to China in a deal valued at $37 billion. Ford and China's Anhui Zhongye Automobile are continuing their plans to invest $750 million together to build electric cars. China's oil company Sinopec signed a $43 billion deal to develop liquefied natural gas in Alaska. Qualcomm will be selling $12 billion worth of semiconductors to Chinese smartphone makers like Xiaomi. And on the manufacturing side, Viromet signed a deal with Hangzhou Iron and Steel to treat textile and sewage waste at more than 800 plants. And then there's agriculture. CGTN's Roy Ruttenberg joins me now to go through all of that.
That's right, Elaine, some very big deals. And let's just look at some of the most significant ones. Chinese companies signed letters of intent to buy 12 million tons of American soybeans. They're valued at around $5 billion. So that's really good news to the states in the upper Midwest. Why? Because some 80% of American soybeans are cultivated there. So if you're a soybean grower there now in one of those states, you're very happy about this. And another big one, JD.com Inc., a Chinese e-commerce giant, agreed to buy $2 billion worth of American goods over the next 3 years. More than half of that, $1.2 billion, will be imports of U.S. beef and pork. Now, $200 million of that will be for Montana beef. The news was welcomed by Max Baucus. He's the former U.S. ambassador to China, and before that, he was the U.S. senator from which state? Montana. But it's not just his state that's benefiting from this deal. This week, I sat down with Pete Ricketts. He's the Republican governor of a neighboring state, Nebraska, and he said that under President Trump, beef has become an important part of his state's trade with China.
Nebraska is the largest beef exporting state in the country. Every year we export about $1.1 billion. And being able to have the opportunity to be able to serve the Chinese market is a big deal for us. And we think that folks in China will find that U.S. beef, especially beef from Nebraska, is the best in the world. And it was one of the things the president promised to do on the campaign trail was to be able to talk to China about opening up that market. He met with President Xi Jinping in April, and in June we got the market open. So we're ecstatic about the opportunity to be able to serve the Chinese market.
You visited China in 2015, and again in 2016 you led a delegation. You met with Donald Trump, candidate in 2016, in both cases lobbying for Nebraska beef. What did you say to both sides?
Well, in the case of then candidate Trump, I was just describing to him, the opportunities that we had here in Nebraska with regard to the Chinese marketplace and some of the barriers that we had encountered, and asked for his help in being able to open that market up, and just in general as well, helping with trade opportunities. And then with regard to Chinese officials, just again, encouraging them to open up the marketplace, to give us an opportunity to be able to serve the Chinese marketplace with our high quality products, because I think it's a benefit to Chinese consumers, and certainly we want to again find as many opportunities as we can to sell our beef.
The U.S. was locked out of the Chinese beef market for 14 years. During that time, Chinese beef imports grew some 40 times to about a $2.5 billion market. You weren't governor that entire time. You weren't governor most of that time. What was it like as a Nebraskan being on the outside of that market?
Well, obviously that was a huge missed opportunity, and that's why it's so important now that the two countries have worked it out so that we can have access to the marketplace to be able to sell our beef products in there, because as we see, the Chinese market is getting bigger, right? And as you see a burgeoning middle class there, they are looking for those quality products like beef, and we've got the best in the world, and so we want to help meet that demand.
There are some in the Trump administration who have a beef with China, if you'll pardon the pun. Are you worried about it adversely affecting everything that you've fought so hard to gain?
Well, what we want to do is support the Trump administration as they're pursuing their trade policies. We just want to be able to compete with everybody else in the world when it comes to, say, for example, our beef. What we want to also make sure is that everybody knows how important these marketplaces are. China is the largest trading partner we have outside of North America. And so whatever disagreements we have or things that we need to work out, we don't want it to disrupt that overall trade relationship, which has been very beneficial to both countries.
And Nebraska is one of several U.S. states that has a trade office up and running in China. Ricketts said its role is not just to encourage Chinese companies to import American goods like beef and pork and soybeans, but also to invest in the U.S. in these states. Now, Chinese foreign direct investment in Nebraska, he told me, is relatively low. Governor Ricketts says he's working hard to improve that, but Elaine, relationships here are key.
You know, and Rowie, it's one thing to have a deal, but it's another to deliver on it, especially when it comes to food.
Right, so there are a few problems here. It's simple to say there's a demand for products like beef and pork in China and a supply right here in the U.S., but let's just look at pork. JD.com announced last month that it would sell U.S. pork products online in China, but what kind of products? China prohibits the import of American processed meats, so that means no made in America sausage, ham, bacon. WH Group, which a few years ago bought Smithfield, the largest pork producer in the U.S., already set up its own plant in China to make American-style pork products. So while the commitment might be there, while there might be a demand, it's not really clear where the supply will be coming from. And ultimately, it's not clear if that'll actually end up creating many jobs here in the U.S., which of course is a big part of the enthusiasm behind deals like this.
And I imagine once it gets to the market, once it gets there, it'll face some pretty stiff competition.
Exactly, and the Chinese market is very saturated with things like beef imports, and the Chinese middle class, which is making up a bigger and bigger chunk of consumers, has a lot of choices. So the American makers will have to spend time in China face-to-face with distributors, branding their beef, selling the image of states like Montana, think Yellowstone National Park, open plains and blue skies. The Chinese know Japanese Kobe beef, they know Australian Wagyu beef, but the Americans, are 14 years behind. They were out of the game for so long, and getting back in the game will take a lot of hard work and, of course, face time.
All right, Rowie, thank you for that. Let's talk more about American beef. It was only earlier this year that the ban on beef imports to China was lifted. And you heard Rowie mention the impact on states like Montana. CGTN's Henrik Sabrandi recently went there and filed this report.
The air is crisp, the leaves are at full color, the sun is climbing over the horizon. It's the start of a beautiful autumn day in Montana.
It is that. Had a lovely fall so far.
We're headed to Eric Moore's feedlot near Miles City, where what's called the Fall Run is underway. Here, calves born in the spring are weaned from their mothers and prepared for shipping to a beef packing plant elsewhere in the U.S.
The cattle are weighed, they're sorted off from their mothers, they're sorted for gender, steers and heifers. We'll receive anywhere from 200 to 800 a day for the next 10 days.
Rancher Fred Wacker has come to buy 100 head of Black Angus cattle. 15% of the beef he sells now goes to China. He says that number is growing. China banned U.S. beef exports back in 2003 over concerns about mad cow disease. This past summer, that ban was finally lifted. American cattlemen in places like Montana see huge new export possibilities.
We're very careful what they eat. We test the water that they drink.
Wacker thinks his all-natural herd is a perfect fit for the rapidly growing Chinese protein-eating market. One hurdle, his cattle are processed at a plant in Nebraska, 1,000 kilometers from here. That costs him $80 a head. Why, he wonders, not have a similar plant in Montana?
It's going to be more profitable for the Montanans, and it's going to be less expensive for the people that buy it.
The issue came up in September when Chinese Ambassador Sui Chiang-kai came to Montana. Wacker suggested that by helping his state build a packing plant, Chinese investors could get more Montana beef onto the country's dinner plates. He says he got a good reception.
We should keep in mind the real interests of our two peoples, like the people in Montana, people in China, how trade will benefit both peoples.
I think the will to do it is here.
Wacker thinks Montana's advanced cattle genetics and its fresh air and wide open spaces give the state's grain-fed beef a leg up when it comes to Chinese consumers.
You have to be a hardy animal to survive here in Montana.
We can really fulfill the high-end white tablecloth demand.
Ranchers like these are always looking for promising new markets.
The United States agriculture feeds the North American continent 2 or 3 times over as is, so exports are absolutely essential.
Wacker says 1 million head of feeder cattle now leave this state each year. Keeping and processing them here, he says, could open the beef pipeline to China even wider in the years to come.
It's a win-win for both countries.
Hendrik Sabrandi, CGTN, Miles City, Montana.
Let's get some analysis of what we've seen from President Trump, both in China and now Vietnam. I'm joined here in Washington by Afshin Molavi, a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. So, Afshin, you know, the general consensus is that Trump is striking a different tone on this trip than usual. Do you agree with that? And if so, what is the impact?
Well, you know, initially there was this idea that he was striking a different tone. He was a little bit, you know, more docile. But frankly, when you see his most recent speech in Vietnam, he came out full force with America First economic nationalism. So in many ways, he went back to the tone that people are accustomed to with Donald Trump.
How do you read into that, though?
You know, I think President Trump misreads the international architecture. Look, if we look at the post-World War II international architecture that we're living in today, Washington really wrote those rules, and U.S. companies benefit from that. I mean, if it were not for this open international trading system today, the United States would not have the largest economy in the world that it has. You would not see U.S. companies with market caps that are the size of entire economies, entire countries. So the United States has benefited a great deal, not only from open trading, but also from foreign direct investment. I think President Trump missed an opportunity standing before leaders of the Asia Pacific. He should have said, America is open for business, and we welcome your foreign direct investment, and we want more trade, not less trade. But instead, he came forward with this idea of economic nationalism, America first, America being exploited, which really doesn't jibe with the facts.
You know, on trade, we've heard some very different tones from both President Xi Jinping and President Trump. I want you to listen and get your reaction on the other side.
Sure.
Economic globalization has contributed significantly to global growth. Indeed, it has become an irreversible historical trend.
The current trade imbalance is not acceptable. I do not blame China or any other country, of which there are many, for taking advantage of the United States on trade. We are not going to let the United States be taken advantage of anymore. I am always going to put America first, the same way that I expect all of you in this room to put your countries first.
So we hear and see it there. How different are the views on trade when you see what President Xi says and when you see what President Trump says?
Well, you know, it is an interesting situation in our world today when the president of China has become the guardian of globalization and the president of the United States is saying, hold on a second, maybe we need some more walls and more fences and that sort of thing. But I think, you know, what's important here is that the United States-China economic relationship, I mean, this is a valuable relationship for both sides. It's not just about the trade deficit. It's not just about those numbers. Look, China last year invested $46 billion into the United States economy, a record year. There are, and the trade that goes from, you know, Apple, a company like Apple earns 25% of its global revenues from China. And Apple is in every 401k and every pension fund and so the relationship is a lot more complex than President Donald Trump characterizes it as. Now, President Xi, I think it's important that he points out this term of economic globalization because where you stand depends on where you sit. And if you sit in Asia, if you sit in the emerging markets, globalization has really helped you build your middle class. And I think that's important for America's future and for the global future, for there to be more prosperity, not less prosperity.
A lot has been said about what people have been hearing over the last 24, 48 hours. First, David Axelrod had something to say. He was former U.S. President Barack Obama's senior advisor. Let's hear what he had to say about Trump's visit to China.
Ironically, he campaigned on getting tough on China. He's been the best gift China could receive. So I think around most of Asia, there is a sense of American withdrawal that has opened up an opportunity for the Chinese.
Your reaction to that? Is he saying what everyone's thinking?
Well, you know, I don't know what he's saying there, honestly, because President Barack Obama, who was his boss, was not robustly challenging China either in the South China Sea. Maybe rhetorically he was, but it wasn't robustly challenging China. I guess the main difference is that President Obama negotiated the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was a trade agreement cum geopolitical positioning. And the geopolitical positioning was excluding China from this Asia-Pacific trade agreement. And President Donald Trump ripped it up in his first day in office. I don't think trade agreements should have geopolitical aims. I think trade agreements should be trade agreements. And you do the geopolitics and you put that aside. So I'm not quite sure what David Axelrod is saying, because I don't see that much difference in the policy geopolitically between the Obama administration and the Trump administration when it comes to South China Sea issues, when it comes to China issues. The difference is in trade. And thus far, it's been rhetorical. Let's see what President Donald Trump actually does when it comes to China.
Let's turn to the two countries' militaries and a risk of a confrontation in the Pacific. Listen to President Xi Jinping during Trump's state visit to Beijing.
We believe that China and the United States are countries with important influence in the Asia-Pacific. As I said to the President, the Pacific Ocean is big enough to accommodate both China and the United States.
So how do you see this playing out, especially when there are still lingering issues in the South China Sea?
You know, I think this is inevitable, that we're going to see China continue to build up its navy, continue to play a more prominent role in the Pacific Ocean. I think it's inevitable as any large power like China grows its economy, it's going to want to play a larger role. And I think President Xi is right that we are going to have to understand that the Pacific Ocean is large enough for both powers. I think the United States Navy is still the largest, most powerful Navy in the world, and it will continue to play a very prominent role across the Pacific Ocean. But at some point, this is the single most important relationship that the United States has today, foreign relationship. It's the relationship with China. And this is a relationship that needs to be managed carefully, and it needs to be managed with strategic vision and foresight. And we can't let the day-to-day tactical stuff get in the way of a strategic arrangement between China and the United States. This is inevitable.
Overall, how would you evaluate President Trump's visit to Asia with all the stops he's made?
Yeah, you know, it seems to me that President Trump's visit to Asia has been let me put it this way. It seems to me that President Trump's visit to Asia has been a missed opportunity. It's been a missed opportunity for America. And the reason I say this is because Asia is where the economic future is. Asia is where the economic center of gravity is. When you look at the future of growth, it's in the Asian middle class. And when President Obama talked about the Asia pivot, American companies said, where have you been? We've been pivoting to Asia for a long time, whether it's Starbucks or whether it's McDonald's or whether it's KFC or big American brands. They've been targeting Asia for decades. And now I think it was a missed opportunity, because what President Trump should have done is acknowledged the growth of Asia, acknowledged the growth of the Asian middle class, and latched American growth onto the growth of Asia. And I think there was a missed opportunity there.
All right, we'll leave it there. Afshin Molavi, thank you so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
So, differing views here in the United States about President Trump's trip and his next stop, the Philippines. We'll be watching. Back to you.
Thanks so much, Elaine. Now, much more to come after this. Well, the APEC Ministerial Meeting and the APEC Economic Leaders Meeting have been held in Vietnam this week. Before we look into the specifics of this year's gathering, let's now take a look at the key APEC milestones over the past decade.
In 2007, the focus was climate change. APEC member economies had an in-depth discussion on weather issues and passed the Sydney APEC Leaders Declaration on Climate Change, Energy Security, and Clean Development. 2008, the spotlight was on economics. APEC focused on the social aspects of trade and reducing the gap between developing and developed members. Leaders also addressed the global financial crisis. In 2009, new growth model was in focus. APEC resolved to pursue balanced, inclusive, and sustainable growth, issuing the Singapore Declaration, saying that APEC's common goal remains the same: to support growth and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific through free and open trade and investment. 2010, all eyes were on economic integration. APEC leaders issued the Yokohama Vision to provide a roadmap to realize an economically integrated, robust, and secure APEC community. 2011, the focal point was closely connected regional economies. The Honolulu Declaration was issued, with APEC leaders committing to taking concrete steps toward a seamless regional economy, addressing shared green growth objectives, and advancing regulatory cooperation and convergence. 2012, emphasis was on integration and innovation. APEC economies endorsed a list of environmental goods to contribute to green growth and sustainable development objectives. Meanwhile, APEC touched on transparency as the next generation trade and investment issue. In 2013, focus was on a dynamic Asia-Pacific region. Measures to enhance regional connectivity were endorsed, including an APEC multi-year plan on infrastructure development and investment prioritizing public-private partnership projects. 2014, the future was the priority. APEC leaders committed to greater regional economic integration by endorsing a roadmap to translate the vision for a free trade area of the Asia-Pacific into a reality. Members implemented the first-ever APEC connectivity blueprint to achieve targets for better physical, institutional, and people-to-people linkages across the region by 2025. 2015, the spotlight was on micro-enterprises. APEC leaders united behind the opportunity to build an inclusive economy in a bid to make economic growth felt in more sectors of society. Acknowledging uneven global growth and the presence of risks and uncertainty in the global economy, leaders agreed to set forth policy enablers for the integration of micro, small, and medium enterprises in regional and global markets, for building sustainable and resilient communities, developing human capital, and enhancing the regional economic integration agenda. In 2016, all eyes were on growth and human development. APEC leaders reaffirmed member economies' confidence in international trade as a mechanism for achieving positive economic and social change. Specifically, they expressed support for advancing regional economic integration and the growth agenda, developing human capital, modernizing micro, small, and medium businesses, and enhancing the regional food system. In line with these priorities, APEC put forward policy commitments for members to move toward sustainable economic integration in the region. And what achievements will there be this year? I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
Now, Chinese President Xi Jinping has met with Vietnamese Prime Minister in Da Nang, and he said the two neighbors should extend the breadth and depth of their comprehensive strategic cooperation. President Xi also expressed condolences over the heavy casualties and damage caused by Typhoon Damri in southern and central Vietnam. He said China will support Vietnam's relief efforts. And President Xi Jinping will fly Sunday to Hanoi to start his state visit to Vietnam. Let me now ask my panel to weigh in again. Andy, so over 97% of companies in the region are actually small, medium, and micro-sized enterprises, and your company offers consulting service to those startups. From your observations, how can they benefit from APEC?
Well, we work with not just startups, but fast-growing companies, mostly in China, but throughout the region. And I think the most important benefit is the reduction in transaction costs. So with greater regional economic integration, small businesses are especially well positioned to benefit. So it's worth pointing out that today is November 11th, which is also Double 11 or Singles Day in China. And in the first 3 minutes, from midnight to 12:03 this morning, $1.5 billion in sales were booked. So that just shows the explosive commercial opportunity that China offers, not just to Chinese SMEs, but SMEs from all around the world, especially in the Asia-Pacific region. So I think that this reduction in trade barriers and more generally just reduction in transaction costs and the ability to let small businesses more quickly get to market, more easily get paid, really will be a huge force, not just for economic development, but for political and social stability in the APEC region.
Yeah. You know, we just heard our American guest talked about this, the very different views laid out by the two presidents representing the world's two largest economies. One saying, you know, putting me first, putting my country first. The other one talking about shared future, common destiny. So the concept of, you know, economic nationalism versus economic globalism. And also one is talking about Indo-Pacific and the other one stands for Asia-Pacific.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts after hearing all this?
I think, you know, right now the problem is that, you know, the world has been undergoing a kind of transformation, profound transformation in terms of, for example, the model of development, momentum of growth, even the process of globalization that actually resulted in some sort of a problem like you know, income disparity, you know, unequal development among different regions. And there are also transformation in the area of global governance and so on. So you know, in the past, you know, globalization had you know, shaped you know, the world as it is today, and we are now facing different kinds of challenges, and we need actually to have this kind of adjustment. But the Americans, you know, they are taking different perspectives. You know, they are even defining, you know, the past Asian pivot into a kind of Indo-Asia Pacific. You know, I'm going to ask the question when APEC is going to be changed into IPEC, which I don't think it is going to be possible. But you know, that kind of shift, you know, represents you know, the different positions being taken by the world #1 economy and the emerging economies being represented by China. So, but you know, China's attitude is simple and clear. You know, we need to have continued globalization, but you know, with the changing environments, you know, we need to adjust ourselves, you know, to adapt ourselves to the new situation. For example, conceptually, we need to have, you know, say kind of you know, inclusiveness. You know, we need to be open, for example, in terms of our attitudes toward trade and investment. You know, directionally, you know, we need to be, you know, equitable. You know, to be balanced. You know, in terms of our efforts, in terms of the achieving the effects of the economic development. You know, I think. You know, this is really the difference, and from the outcome so far, we, you know, I mean, of the APEC meeting, we have seen the increasing consensus, you know, continued globalization, or probably the effort to re-globalize, you know, to, for example, to take into consideration of countries of different levels of development, different stratus of society, different group of people, and so on.
How do you think that these two messages are being reviewed by the audience there at APEC's leaders meeting, and also global investors who are watching this all over the world?
Well, I think that clearly the center of gravity is shifted to China, as we heard from many earlier guests today. So whether they're large businesses, small businesses, governments, I think increasingly are turning towards China with a sense of optimism. And conversely, on the other hand, I think because of the more inward-turning nature of the Trump administration by putting America first, I think that's creating some concerns and doubts about the U.S. as either a market or as an investment destination.
All right, thank you very much. Now, for more analysis, joining me again. I don't think that's the message here. All right, now our colleague Tianwei is joining us live in Da Nang. Tianwei, over to you.
Thank you, Qiu Yuan. You know, when we talk about the APEC Economic Leaders Week, there are a lot of things going on. One of the things people are looking at is those leaders coming from the economies in the region. Earlier, we have already briefed you a little bit about their thoughts. There are some others who are really new onto the stage. For example, Carrie Lam, who is the chief executive of Hong Kong, and Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Let's listen to some of their perspectives. You're here with a lot of wonderful goals. One of them is Hong Kong ASEAN Free Trade Agreement.
Yes.
And how is that likely to benefit Hong Kong, in the short term particularly?
Well, first of all, Hong Kong is a founding member of the World Trade Organization, so we are a very strong supporter of the multilateral trading system. So we are about to sign this Hong Kong ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, and of course, you know, the ASEAN region is Hong Kong's second largest trading partner in terms of goods and fourth largest in terms of services. The FTA is also complemented by an investment agreement. So we are seeing a lot more Hong Kong investors going into some of the ASEAN countries. So to have an FTA in place will provide that sort of market access, certainty, and also some dispute resolution arrangements which will be beneficial to both parties.
Where is the issue of sustainable development, resource efficiency on your administration's agenda right now?
Government and business needs to work together in partnership to get our economic settings and incentives right to enable us to transition to a low-carbon future. Now, this, among many things, means structurally reforming our economies to provide the right set of incentives to drive change, including better and smarter use of regulation, to encourage innovation and more efficient use of our resources to benefit all. Now, my government is doing just that. We have announced an intention to pass a Zero Carbon Act. We will be putting into law a new goal of net zero emissions by 2050. And we'll also be proposing to establish a climate commission to provide independent advice to the government on climate issues, such as our new goal to transition New Zealand to 100% renewables by 2035.
That's the New Zealand, the new Prime Minister talking about the issue of climate change. We see a lot of debates about various issues during the APEC Economic Leaders Week. However, there are also those that the delegations at the end of the day would like all of us to know. And whether they have fulfilled their roles and their goals, it is really up for debate. And I'm joined by two correspondents of CGTN, Ryan Meltzer of CGTN, and certainly Zhou Yun also sitting with us here in Da Nang. So Zhou Yun, I understand you just came back from one of the latest press conferences given by the Chinese delegation. A lot of food for thought?
Right. Well, before I say anything, that's a brilliant choice. You know, Vietnamese dress, and you look amazing in that.
And you know what? It's originally coming from China, the style itself. So that's
really?
interesting.
That's
Integration, connectivity, that's what
and culture
about.
and also people exchange.
Right.
Well, before I say anything, take a look at my notebook. It's like I took a lot. Sorry, forgive me about my messy handwriting, but there's a lot of, you know, takeaways as well as
So what are the things in
I only
it?
need 10 minutes to explain. No, I'm kidding. So the basic information that I get from the press briefing is that the Chinese delegation thinks it's a very fruitful and also successful meeting, because we know Chinese President Xi Jinping has put forward many important proposals on the regional integration, about the future development of the Asia Pacific. And besides that, there are also serious commitment that's made and also reaffirmed. For instance, the leaders, they signed up this on the non-declaration this afternoon, and in that, one of the very important key point is that the countries have been reaffirmed to commitment about not imposing any protective measures until 2020.
Right.
So that's actually important given the environment we're now facing. To some countries are now withdrawing from the globalization and multilateralism.
So that's kind of reaffirming message in a way, coming from different economies saying,
exactly,
this is not the way we want to go, anti-globalization. We still want to have regional integration. What about for you, Ryan? I mean, you've been covering a lot of debates related to TPP and RCEP. Some economies join TPP. Many of the economies certainly are interested in RCEP. What are the latest?
Well, what's interesting is when you look at APEC, it is really TPP and RCEP are both critical trade deals for this region. I mean, there's 11 members, all 11 of them are members of APEC for the TPP, and 12 countries are members of RCEP, it's China, Japan, South Korea,
6 partners and also
the ASEAN countries and others. So these are critical trade deals for both. So here you are when you have President Trump here, who's clearly, in his speech yesterday, was very much harsh, criticizing his trading partners, U.S. trading partners, very much anti-globalization, anti-free trade, despite speaking to a very vociferously pro-free trade audience. And yet, I still think that APEC in their final declaration came out and said, well, regardless of what the U.S. thinks, we're still committed to globalization, to free trade, to multilateral trade deals. And we saw with the progress made with the TPP, yes, they didn't sign the deal. That was a little disappointing, but still they made progress on it, that commitment. And RCEP, of course, the goal of when that's going to be completed keeps shifting, but we expect progress to be made and expect that to be completed soon.
And that's what it takes when it comes to multilateral trade agreement. You really have to have everyone to sign on it so that it wouldn't break after you work on it. So, but having said that, though, it's not just the government delegations. It's also the business community as well. I understand there are a lot of different investment coming into Vietnam from the ASEAN countries. You cover, Zhou Yuan, one of those stories, solar panel.
Yeah, exactly.
What is it about?
I visited a big factory. It's actually the largest Chinese invested factories in Vietnam from China on solar panel production. And in order to have a better idea about the story, you need to know a little bit background information, because we know back in 2014, the U.S., Europe, they imposed a very, very serious, trade remedies on China's exported trade solar panels. So the anti-subsidy, the anti-dumping tariff is like over 100%. So at that time, the Chinese companies, they started to build their factories outside China in countries we have a close tie with, such as Vietnam. But now, not only in the past 3 years have they witnessed like an explosive growth, but also what they are doing here is making an impact about the policies in Vietnam. Now the government here actually, they put more emphasis about the renewable energy development, about the solar panel, and also that changed the concept of how people on China's overseas investment. Maybe Ryan, you know this. Like every time we talk about China's overseas investment, what first strike your mind might be, manufacturing, the shoemaking, the infrastructure building. But this time it's actually about the renewable energy. It's about the solar panel production. And I visited the factory. It was amazing. And seeing is believing. So before I say too many stuff about it, let's take a look about my story and to see how the future of China's overseas development could look like.
A state-of-the-art factory for solar panel production. It was established in 2014 with the belief that the Belt and Road Initiative will bring more opportunities in renewable energy cooperation between China and Vietnam. And now this solar company has been on the way to become China's biggest overseas company of its kind.
When we first came, our annual output was only about 200 megawatts worth of solar installations. And now it has jumped to 4.8 gigawatts. That's a growth of 24 times.
Not only has the company itself witnessed explosive growth, they have also introduced a dozen of Chinese solar companies to make investment in Vietnam. Yang said that the move will not only make Vietnam society better understand solar industry, but also propel the bilateral cooperation in renewable energy.
Our cluster of solar investment cooperation here combined takes up about 10% of the total output worldwide.
But does the Chinese investment pose threat to local solar producers? Benny Diep was among the first Vietnamese to invest in solar panel manufacturing.
Chinese invested products are exported to the US and Europe, and ours are sold mainly in Vietnam. So it's a great opportunity for us to learn and to cooperate.
And China's rapid development in the field of solar energy has not only helped to improve the quality of the economic cooperation between China and Vietnam, but also make the development of both countries greener and more sustainable. So Yun, CGTN, reporting from Bac Giang, Vietnam.
certainly a very interesting and significant the solar panel story going on there north to Hanoi. But you know what? This is the thing people are talking about during this year's APEC Economic Leaders Week. That is, we need to pay attention to innovation, pay attention to the climate, to have all of these ideas at the very beginning of the development stage. It is much better than when you hit the wall and you realize there are things that you have to do from the very beginning. Having said that, though, trade deals is too. And you have talked about that, Ryan, but there are other stories you're also hitting. Or should I say, you didn't choose, but eventually you encountered.
Yes. When I first came here, I intended to go to Hoi An, which is a UNESCO heritage town. It's about 30 kilometers from here. It was a very, very important stop on the ancient Silk Road, actually. And that was the tie-in to APEC, the Silk Road angle.
We envied you for that story, you know.
Well, you thought you did, but when I arrived, there was torrential rain from the aftermath of the typhoon that passed through here, and the first road was flooded the first night that I arrived. By the second day, the second road was flooded, and by the third day, the whole old town was flooded a couple of meters high.
So how did you do your story?
By boat, partly by boat. But I think the Vietnamese really showed their determination and resilience and also their entrepreneurial spirit there because, for instance, the boat operators made a killing taking tourists into the old town. That was the only way they could get around. So what's interesting is Hoi An was a very important place on the Silk Road until the rulers of Vietnam decided they were worried about outside cultural influences and they sort of closed free trade. And that caused Hoi An to become a backwater for 2 centuries. So I thought there was sort of a parable there about the importance of being open and free trade and the dangers of being isolationist and protectionist, that it resulted in Hoi An becoming a backwater. So
it is really about the mindset, isn't it? So people there, I'm sure they know very well the importance of free trade for themselves.
Yes, I think so, because and also of globalization, because now, of course, it's become a hugely important tourist destination, whereas before, you know, we know the history of this place, Da Nang, was where the first American troops landed during the Vietnam War, the American War, as they call it here, and, you know, it's gone from that to becoming a thriving city, a dynamic city, a clean city, a city that wants to be a green city, a sustainable city, and if you look at this place, you can see they're on that track.
Right. A lot of excitement going on here in this part of the world, not only just because of its economic growth, but also cultural diversity, but also the rich history, how the rich history is interacting with the modern development. It's just fascinating. But for now, I have to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for your wonderful stories and your sharing of thoughts. All the best. And that is all the time we have for this part in Da Nang. Back to you in Beijing, Qiu Yuan.
Thank you so much, Tianwei. Now, green growth and sustainable development are also important items on the APEC agenda, as we mentioned earlier. In the Indonesian capital, Jakarta, the Asia-Pacific Food Forum has brought together social elites with one goal: to feed the world's 9 billion people in a healthy and environmentally friendly way by 2050. CGTN Silkina Aluwalia has more.
As the global population keeps growing, the demand for food continues to increase. This rapid growth, coupled with climate change, has made it difficult to produce enough food to meet the demands of more than 7 billion people around the world. In Indonesia, a country of 250 million people, achieving food security in a sustainable way remains a challenge. The food sector is made up of a long supply chain, starting from agriculture to the meals that end on dinner tables. That's what the Asia-Pacific Food Forum aims to improve. A collaboration between the Indonesian Health Ministry and the EAT Foundation, the forum brings together 500 participants from around the world to discuss, take action, and commit to a transformation in the regional food system. The heart of the issue here is food, but economic factors such as poor infrastructure contributes to the uneven access of food to many rural areas in Indonesia. That's why it's important for local governments, private institutions, and residents to work together to improve the national food system in the country. For Indonesia, a sustainable food system does not only involve health, agriculture, and the environment, but also the importance of education and equal economic growth across the nation. Silkina Aluwalia, CGTN, Jakarta.
So let's talk about green development here. Let me bring back Andy Mok and also Mr. Liu. You know, APEC plays an important role in pursuing green development. And when the Chinese president was there, when talking about China's efforts in pursuing green development, he sent out a very strong message. He said that when China set a goal, we won't stop until the goal is met. Talk to us about the collective efforts we can make here.
The collective efforts in terms of environmental protection, for example, I think in 2012 there was a kind of initiative, for example, to bring down the import tariff of environmental goods to below, for example, to less 5%, and that took quite a bit of effort actually, and eventually, apart from a couple of countries, most of the countries, have already, lowered their tariff to 0 or less than 5%, and that gives us a kind of a picture that if in terms of promoting or boosting trade and investment, you would need to have collective effort, and countries need to work together to make sure that trade investment is liberalized, and all the, for example, the custom procedures are kind of simplified, and transaction cost reduced. This is really is going to help the economies to really to grow and to really reach, for example, the goal of common development and prosperity. Of course, we need to have a shared vision. If you don't really have a shared vision, and I think the steps taken by different countries will not be in synchrony. So that is going to be very challenging. But still, I think we now have a common goal, which is FTAAP. I think with that, I think the APEC organization is going to be in a very good shape in terms of trade, investment, and liberalization.
Well, dealing with climate change really involves global cooperation, but now with the United States pulling out from the Paris Climate Accord, do you think it's going to be hard to reach any consensus around the Pacific?
Well, I think the bad news in this regard is that the U.S. At the national levels, like the 1% in the United States, being narcissistic, entitled, and out of touch. The good news is that at the state level, states like California, Washington State, are very proactive in working not just in the United States but globally to address these issues. And we look at corporations as well, taking very seriously this notion of corporate citizenship, combined with the fact that China now is able to set some of these global rules like electric vehicles, that I think that a consensus is able to be reached, and that there is room for optimism that developing countries may actually be able to leapfrog some stages of development and get to a level of green and sustainable economic development.
All right, thank you for staying with us throughout the hour, Mr. Liu and Mr. Andy Mok. I appreciate your insights. Now, after discussing issues ranging from innovation and climate change to food security and clothing, the leaders at this year's APEC meeting also carried on the tradition of wearing the local attire. Let's now take a look back at some APEC fashion and other lighthearted moments over the past few years. The 25th APEC Economic Leaders Meeting was held on Saturday in the Vietnamese city of Da Nang. Leaders and representatives discussed sustainable growth and prosperity in the Asia-Pacific region. And that brings us to the end of tonight's APEC special coverage. To keep up to date on all the top stories, you can follow CGTN on your favorite social media platforms. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.
Well, we just finished our grand finale, everybody! Yay! So we need some photos.
Okay.
Can you help us to take some photos, please?
Selfies, or how should we do it?
Can I take my jacket off then if we've finished?
You know, there are also people who are doing live or the other in the next door, so we want to be a little bit quiet and behave. This is how it works. You know, we have different kind of booths along the corridor, different news organizations. Yes, indeed, we do live stand-up from different booths. If you just take a look at that, over there.
Is it lady doing live right now?
What's going on there? Exactly, that's how it works. That's right, but we are still going to take our photo. We would love to have one of our wonderful, wonderful cameramen, Ed. Take a look at Ed. Ed is coming from Thailand originally. Ed, would you like to help us take a photo?
Okay.
How could you refuse, my friend? Okay, so let's, yes. Sawadika, yes indeed. Let's.
1, 2, 3, cheese. One more. 1, 2, 3.
All right, thank you so much, Ed. Ed is always very helpful. He is running around the clock for us, and also in some crisis management situation, a lot of those situations.
I know, I understand, yeah. It has been 10 days. I can't wait to go back home. But I will miss the pho, particularly.
Yeah, I love
You love it?
Yeah. Every meal, I wish I could have the pho.
Does that mean you can't get it back home? Because we can certainly get it in Kuala Lumpur, where I live, or Vancouver, my hometown.
I'm a little bit jealous of you. Maybe the taste is a little bit different.
Yes, it is. Well, they make it with pork bones here. They boil pork bones to make the stock, and in Malaysia, it's halal, so no pork. It's just beef. So.
But those sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
And it's dinner time, by the way. So stop talking about
Okay,
that.
yes, I know. My tummy's rumbling
Let's meet our
here.
team. Yeah, team, we want to be quiet. The other people are still doing stand-up. But let's celebrate already. This is Julian. Julian.
Hello, everyone.
Where are you from, Julian?
I'm from the UK, but I live in Bangkok.
Oh, good for you. I saw your little daughter on the stamp.
Well, it's a boys, actually. They've got long hair, but it's a boy.
I better know.
It's very,
And meet these two wonderful ladies. They make the whole thing possible. Xiao Jian, our producer, executive producer for the trip, and Angela.
I've been eating my way through Da Nang where everyone's busy with the APEC leaders this week.
We are extremely jealous about that specific fact.
But I bought really nice stuff for everyone and at the office, so hopefully I can make amendments by next week.
You see, we all have this Vietnamese Tham San, which is called Ao Dai. Yes, yes. They also say, the locals say, originally it is coming from China.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it's a Chinese cham sam, right?
Like the chi pao. So it's got the same style.
Yeah,
but we've had it altered a bit, especially at the neck. I think we had a live going on this afternoon to say that you can either have the traditional neckline or you can have the fusion.
Exactly. So let's also go over there to really find the real secrets. Shall we go together? Yeah, yeah. Okay, here is a little bit messy, but you know, bear with us. This is how the backstage is. Someone is leaving, he needs to come back. 把老具叫回来. I'm speaking Chinese to my colleague, and here's the. This is the central control guy. Zhuyang, please, please, please. He's a little bit shy. You know, usually the people at the background are a bit shy, I guess. Yeah. So I guess we all know them well. So yeah, Zhuyang. So he is the one who is doing the central control and connecting with Beijing from Da Nang. Our man, we usually call him 老鲍.
好。
the executive producer coming from the new media.
Hello, CGTN users on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and app.
One could tell he's really coming from the new media department.
Yeah, he remembers the entire list of all the new media,
yes.
And he's the one that's been encouraging me to do more for new media. So I thought he has to speak, have his turn speaking as well.
Shall we move a little bit over there, all of us, so that we can talk to one another? We are coming back. Yes, we're coming back. We need everyone to talk a little bit, no matter which language. Angela, you are not leaving, and Xiaojian, you are not leaving.
A very important job.
Very important job. Yeah. So actually, this studio is developing from nothing, from zero to what it is. Yes. There's another important guy who helped us to set all of this up. He's not here. Usually, these people want to hide behind the scenes.
Yes, I mean, this obviously is a huge organizational feat to put on something like APEC. And the funny part is actually this media center is about 20-minute drive away from the venue where things were actually happening. And even further from where it happened today, the Intercontinental Hotel, which is right around the bay, and it's something like 20 kilometers away from Da Nang town. So we're quite isolated here in that sense, and everything is by remote. It's a little bit frustrating at times. But of course, security is a huge, huge issue when you've got 21 leaders coming in, and especially once President Xi and Donald Trump arrived yesterday, things got very tight.
Yeah, not only that, but also the communication issue with our drivers sometimes. Very interesting. So I'm sure you have been running on stories. You know, you have to go there and get all the stories. So I'm sure the communication with the driver sometimes could be quite tricky.
Yeah, now I think now they understand a few English words. One is IMC, it's like International Media Center. It's like IMC, hotel. That's basically the two words that I understand. Exactly. But it's enough for us to communicate.
And we love big data because big data could help us to translate from English into Vietnamese so that our drivers would understand. So the world is changing.
But some of the time those translations are just gobbledygook, and you think, okay, that's not correct. I hope what I wrote makes more sense than what he wrote, because that makes no sense at all. But it's hit or miss.
Yes, exactly. But you know, this is part of the world that is really changing fast.
It's the beauty.
And yeah, I mean, our drivers could even speak some Chinese. You could tell.
Oh, really?
Well, very basic Chinese.
Like ni hao mei li. No, ni hao mei li. Like you're so beautiful.
Yeah, something like that. So it shows the integration of the countries and also the economies in this region.
Yeah, exactly. And whenever, this is the rewarding thing about being a journalist. We feel it. When you go there, you actually feel it. We talk about the Belt and Road. We didn't see the urgency for building so many infrastructure until we got here to see so many motorcycles running on the streets. You saw that. I think every time I cross the road with so many motorcycles running across me, it's like a life-risking chance every single time.
You know what? There's nothing compared to do a story on the site.
Yep.
The excitement of it. I mean, from the very beginning of this year, for example, I covered the Davos World Economic Forum, and then the Belt and Road Initiative Conference, and then the G20, and then also the BRICS Summit. You all see these kind of excitement going on, right?
And the 19th National Congress.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But you know, when it comes to this region and come to idea and exchanges, that's really where the excitement is.
But you were talking about the different cultures and the exchange of cultures and so on. But actually, in this region, it's not new. In this country, it's not new because, as I mentioned when we were live on TV, that I started my trip in Hoi An, the ancient Silk Road town. Now, if you go to that town, the historical icon, the architectural icon, and the symbol of the town is a footbridge built by the Japanese. But there's also huge Chinese influence there. Chinese temples, Chinese architecture, clan houses, all over the place, merchant houses, and also French colonial architecture. Right. So you have this mixing that goes back there. Basically what you need is an open door to trade, and then you get this kind of mixing.
And also the currency flowing very free in a way, in a free world almost. In this part of Vietnam, you could just use RMB to buy stuff.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I didn't know until the very last day today.
What did you buy?
I just bought the dress. Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Wow.
I could use RMB to buy this dress, and they say you could also use RMB to buy little souvenirs and things like that.
Wow.
So you see, because they also travel to China very frequently, so they could use these currency.
Right.
So it's amazing what we are seeing today.
It is.
Today meaning in this part of the world. Right. You've been covering for 20 years.
20 years in ASEAN, yes. Based in Malaysia, thank you. I was 10 years old when I came here, yes. Based in Malaysia, traveling all around all the ASEAN countries and beyond. And yes, the rapid change. I mean, you were talking about all the motorcycles here in Da Nang, and I look at Da Nang and say, this is so quiet here. Da Nang is such a quiet place. No, it is so quiet. And the people drive so slowly compared to Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. I mean, when I first went to Ho Chi Minh City, people were cycling around wearing clothes like you, cycling everywhere. And then those bicycles, they turned into motorbikes. And then those motorbikes turned into cars. And now both cities are absolute mayhem. And Da Nang is moving at a snail's pace in comparison, and very mellow and not much traffic.
Don't worry, the bike's going to come back. It's going to be the shared bikes in the new economy.
I think you're right.
Yes, indeed.
But not during the aftermath of typhoons. I don't think it's recommended
You know,
for that.
you see the connectivity going on here. I'm not here to do any preaching, but really you see it with your own eyes.
You feel it. Yeah.
Talking about the connectivity, I remember, since you're covering Malaysia for quite a long time, the Malaysian Prime Minister, Mr. Najib, in one of those sessions, he was talking about the Malaysians are selling the durians over the e-commerce platforms to China. And he said, it tastes like heaven, smells like hell.
Yes, 20 years in Malaysia is not long enough for me to acquire a taste for durian. My kids eat it and love it, Malaysian born, but I think I will never ever get a taste for it, I'm afraid. But I always leave it for those who love it. So I'm generous that way.
Story, it's one of those stories that you really see new technologies are changing this part.
Exactly.
And the connectivity we have.
Yeah.
And do a solar panel story, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
And that's a show and demonstration of it.
It is, and also not only the solar panels, Vietnam, Hanoi is actually going to have its first elevated train that is built from China. So we're gonna have, it's not the bullet train, but it's like a city train that's gonna be faster, and people don't have to ride on those motorcycles anymore. So yeah, so you feel it. You were being, you were saying the first draft of history. You were being the first rower to witness those changes. It's amazing. The dress is like everything here. The dress, everything is like combination of different cultures, of the diversified elements, of the flow. So yeah, that's amazing.
And you also see the young people here. I mean, this is the thing that we don't want to forget. Not only the young leaders, you see the Canadian Prime Minister.
Sorry
he was pretty much welcomed and jammed in a way.
Trudeau-mania, we call it.
Yes, by Prime Minister Trudeau. But that's one of those young leaders. You also have the New Zealand Prime Minister, Prime Minister Ardern, very young, less than 40 years old. And you also have different diversities going on among the leaders, female leaders, for example, coming from Hong Kong, Chief Executive Carrie Lam, who I interviewed earlier, and also the Chilean president.
Yes, with the Spanish first name and the Polish surname, and he went to Oxford University.
Yeah, and
he's quite an impressive guy.
For the women organization of the United Nations,
yeah, he's an
and then
impressive guy.
also the New Zealand Prime Minister. So you see a diversity of that. That's the young leaders. Not to mention many of the thought leaders, business people that are young. And you met certainly some of them.
I met some of them, and some of them are like my age. I feel so ashamed for not achieving anything so far. They have. Thank you for that, and flatter. Yeah, but they were born after 1980s, which is like around their 30s, and they could have a listed company now in China with like a market value of over like thousands of hundreds of US dollars. Yeah, and now they come here. But I think I really admire their courage, because it's an opportunity for them to expand international market for sure. But it's a testament, because their company could die overnight because of this fierce combination from other countries. So it's an opportunity as well as challenges. I really mean it. But they have the ambition and the courage to come here all the way from China.
Not only like those supposed to be successful, but also the excitement and the lights you see in the eyes of the young people here. Even just many of the volunteers that we met here.
Yeah, they're an enthusiastic bunch. The Vietnamese are really known for that, for their sort of dynamism and their enthusiasm, and they're very hardworking and diligent, and that's why a lot of foreign investors like to come and invest here. And also
about foreign culture too.
Right, yeah. And a lot of their workers also are going to other countries. Malaysia has a lot of Vietnamese that they bring in to work in factories and so on, but the Vietnamese are really keen to upgrade themselves and get, you know, higher education. I mean, this town has something like 25 universities and colleges in Da Nang, and 60 vocational institutes.
But Vietnam is only one of those examples in the region who are working extremely hard. This part of the world is well known for working hard. No wonder manufacturing sector have been one of the leading factors of this region. But things have been changing, so people here are talking about upgrading their industry, bringing it to a bigger and higher notch. But talking about hardworking, we have been quite hardworking, I would say, folks.
I can speak for myself and say yes. I'm sure you guys have.
You like the camera, move over here and take a look at the International Media Center over there.
Now deserted.
Almost deserted, except just a few of us over there. That's where the presidents, the prime ministers were meeting the press. The important decisions are being announced. We hope they have some more concrete decisions for the future. But certainly people are leaving. Only the few of us are still here in the studio.
Just Facebook stream. I've been pushed to do them previously, so yes.
And what about you, Yun?
I've done a couple, but yeah, I'm enjoying it.
Very relaxed.
So
not like the usual job.
Yes, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to be relaxed, and also to be relaxed while at the same time go inside ourselves in a way, to share with our audience about our thoughts. You know, as journalists, we travel a lot.
Are they saying goodbye, or are they saying that's a wrap?
Hi!
Don't leave without
Let's
us.
come together, please.
This is the farewell, is it? Okay, this is the wrap.
So when it comes to bye-bye already, probably it's the time to wrap it up. What about our producer? Is it okay? So shall we say bye from Da Nang? Bye. Thank you.